Penn State started looking at hemp as a crop in 2017 when our state first made that available in terms of research permits.
That's Alyssa Collins, director of Penn State's Southeast Research and Extension Center. This is the Lancaster Farming Industrial Hemp Podcast. My name is Eric Herlock, and today I'll be talking to Dr. Collins about her work at Penn State's Southeast Research and Extension Center, where she's overseen the university's hemp research program for several years now. We'll talk about the farm and what's been happening there hemp-wise since last time Dr. Collins and I spoke. We'll also get some more details about the hemp research field walk taking place at the farm on August 15th. So all that and more on today's show, but first we're going to take a quick sponsor break. This episode is brought to you in part by I&D Hemp in Fort Benton, Montana, where they believe in the goodness of hemp. I&D Hemp is a family-owned, mission-driven, and environmentally focused industrial hemp food, feed, and fiber company, providing new opportunities for farmers and rural communities. Their mission is to provide innovative agricultural products and services to connect American farmers with the pioneers and businesses that see hemp as a way to bring real and lasting change to our communities and planet. Learn more at indhemp.com. This episode is brought to you in part by Impactful Ventures, an investment and incubation company focused on supporting startups and other initiatives that play a vital role in mitigating the adverse effects of climate change. At Impactful Ventures, they strive to amplify enterprises that bring innovative, green opportunities to the forefront and empower those making a significant impact for a sustainable future. You can learn more at impactfulventures.org.
Hey, it's Greg Wilson from Hempwood in Murray, Kentucky. We support the Lancaster Farming Industrial Hemp Podcast, and you can check us out at hempwood.com. Have a great day.
Yeah, so far I'm having a great day. Thanks, Greg Wilson. Here we are. It's July 19th, 2023. I'm getting ready to go out to Montana next week for the Montana Hemp Summit. Looking forward to getting together with all the fiber and grain folks out there in Big Sky Country. And there are a few other hemp events coming up in August. There's the one in South Dakota from the 3rd to the 5th, and then King's Agri-Seeds is having a 2-day event August 15th and 16th, and the Penn State Research Farm in Lancaster County is having their annual Twilight Hemp Field Walk on August 15th as well. We're going to talk to Dr. Collins about that today. So let's just get started. Dr. Alyssa Collins, welcome back to the Lancaster Farming Industrial Hemp Podcast. How are you doing?
Good. It's great to be back.
Yeah, it's been a while. I wonder if you could reintroduce yourself to our listeners.
Yeah, so I'm Alyssa Collins, and my role is as an associate research professor at Penn State, but I'm also the director of the Penn State Southeast Research and Extension Center. So I'm based in Lancaster County, so about 2 hours away from the main Penn State campus. But I run a research farm. So the work we do here is real life application of some of the ideas and suggestions that might come out of a lab or a greenhouse. We put them to work here and see how they work in the real world.
Okay. Describe the farm for us.
Yeah, so this is about 155 acres, and it's a really typical Lancaster County farm. So it goes, way back in history, and at that time it was a dairy farm, a family dairy farm. When Penn State acquired it, it became a tobacco research center. And so most of the work that was done there was focused on improving the tobacco crop, which was the main cash crop in the area at the time. And so we kind of continue with that, right? So our job is to support what's going on in the region. And so we have changed over time, too, to reflect that. So as more Pennsylvania farmers become interested in producing animal feed or in producing horticultural crops, even ornamentals, that's what we take on as well to answer some of those questions that come up as a result of that. So we are really diverse. We don't have any animals, but we do have pretty much everything else.
Okay. Lancaster County is famous for its farmland and soil. Can you talk about sort of the soil profile of your farm there?
Yeah, so technically our soil is a Hagerstown silt loam, which is pretty typical of the region. High levels of limestone. So we're pretty basic in terms of our acidity, and it holds moisture really well. It retains organic matter really well. And so it's pretty representative of Lancaster County as a whole. And we're very blessed that way because Lancaster County is really productive in the scope of the entire country. We're like the most productive land area, non-irrigated in the country. And so we get to take advantage of that and try all these diverse crops. And so when a new crop kind of pops up and comes across the landscape and people start asking about it, that's one of the things we get to do is try that and see how it works for our growers. And so we've done a little bit of everything. When Jerusalem artichokes were a question, did those. When energy beets were a question, did that. And it's usually not held back by our soils. It's usually held back by some other maybe market or economic factor or climate factor.
Okay. So you've been researching hemp since probably 2017 at Penn State?
Yeah, Penn State started looking at hemp as a crop in 2017 when our state first made that available in terms of research permits. So that was work that was done by Greg Roth, who was our agronomist at the time. And that was done right outside the main campus at our Rock Springs farm. He asked me to kind of come along, and I'm a plant pathologist, so I was interested in the disease aspects, what this crop might get, what it might be resilient to. And so I was doing those observations.
Okay.
A few years later, he decided to retire, and I was basically the only person left who was doing anything in hemp at Penn State. And so by default, I became Penn State's hemp person. And what I knew was very little, but it was really interesting to start on that journey of learning about this new old crop.
Right. You know a bit more now, I assume.
A little bit.
Yeah. I saw that first hemp crop in 2017 up at the Rock Springs farm. I was up there for Ag Progress Days, but the university has since moved most of the hemp research down to the Lancaster County farm, right?
Yeah, basically, one, for convenience, because I'm located at that farm, it made things a lot easier. But two, because a lot of the activity and interest was in South Central PA for growing hemp. And so we want to make sure that we put things where it's most useful to the people who are interested in it. Mm-hmm. And that just made a lot of sense to have it here. Our farm is also a little bit more accessible in the region. It's just easier to get to, and we can do big events here in a way that it's a little bit harder to do when you're up in Happy Valley.
Right, right. And we'll talk about your upcoming Twilight Hemp Field Walk soon, but I've been to several really well-attended hemp events there at the research farm. So it's working. It's been a few years since you've been on the show, and you sort of talked about what kind of work you're doing there. Can you sort of describe the changes that the farm's gone through hemp-wise, or the work you're doing in the past few years? Because I can't believe it's 2023 already. Right?
No, so it's been several years now, and a lot has changed. A lot has really stayed the same. We're kind of on a track here that's got to be methodical. And so a lot of the work we do is repeated. And so that might not be super novel, but it does get us the data that we need. In the industry, of course, that's changed. So the landscape is very different regarding what people are interested in now versus what they started being interested in 2019. And I know you've talked about that a great deal on this podcast, but that does influence what we do as researchers as well, and what kinds of education we deliver to people who are interested in pursuing that. So, I think the people who are now still active in the industry, there's fewer of them, but they're really high quality. The people who are left are committed to making this crop work and finding ways to work with each other. And so I think at that early time in 2019, people were very guarded about what they may have felt were their personal secrets in terms of how they produce it, who their customer base is. We don't really see that so much anymore. The people who are still operating in this are very interested in collaborating, supporting researchers and sharing information. And I think that ultimately just benefits the whole industry. And so I'm glad to see that happening. We're involved in lots of collaborations at the national level, at the regional and state level, in terms of our research and our extension. So the extension part of what Penn State is basically turning what, nerds in a lab or a greenhouse are thinking about and doing in terms of research and translating that for people who can actually use it, who might be putting that to work.
Nerd translation, is that what the mission of the land-grant university is?
Yes.
Okay.
We haven't gotten the AI for that quite yet. So this translation really looks like programs where we go and do field walks. It looks like newsletters. It looks like fact sheets, things like that, where people can find it more accessible, just get what they need, and they don't have to slog through journal articles, right? Because most people don't want to do that. Only real weirdos like us like to sit down with a nice thick journal. But that is equal parts of what we do. So we do the research, and then we try and translate that and other people's research for people who might want to work with it. And so we're collaborating on several of those things, not just Pennsylvania, but across the region and internationally, to do that because, across the country, no one was really, very few people were hired as a hemp specialist, right? We're all just kind of doing that as we can. And so we can help each other a lot. So one of the things that we're involved with as Penn State researchers is something that we're collaborating with across the country. And that would be multi-state variety trials and agronomic trials and some efforts toward keeping this plant healthy, so that we're successful in getting it all the way to a harvest. So the variety trials that we've been conducting actually have been in collaboration with dozens of other universities across the country. We're lucky to have it coordinated by the University of Kentucky. And so the way that works is they request these varieties from all the different domestic and international sources of seeds that we can get. And so they are the repository, and then they divide them up for all the researchers and send them out across the country. So we're all working from the same seed lots, and we get to see, how they perform relatively in our areas. And we're starting to drill down on, hey, this is going to be a good variety for this region, or this is going to be a better variety for that region. Some of the other things that we get to learn from that is, if you're interested in different uses for hemp or different markets, maybe, what varieties are going to be better for those? So, for instance, we have some varieties that started to flower in our variety trial a couple of weeks ago.
Oh.
That's a little bit too early for us. If we would want it to grow into a big plant, that would be good for a lot of fiber or herd production. And so we would make notes about that and say, okay, that's probably a lot better if you're just going for seed production for grain and you didn't have equipment that could really handle a whole lot of biomass to go through your machine. So it's not that it failed in our trials. It's just that it's differently suited depending on what your interests are.
Okay.
There's very few varieties that we've found that are just no-go. Some of those, it might just not have been great conditions in that year. And that's why we keep looking at a lot of the same varieties year after year to see if they perform differently in different conditions.
Right.
One of the things that we have done this year is actually expand our trial locations within Pennsylvania. And so we are replicating these up at Rock Springs as well as here in Lancaster County. And we made an attempt to go out into Western PA. And unfortunately, due to the drought, that stand did not make it. And so we will try again next year and hope for better conditions.
Yeah. I think the last time, or maybe the first time I interviewed you, you talked about this, multi-university research plan, but now it's 4 or 5 years later, so you have a whole lot more data.
That's right.
How do you use that? How do you make that available?
Yeah, so we usually make it available at our events and through reports, but we also combine it. So that's the power of this, right? That we combine it with the other locations. And those reports are available at a national repository. Now, admittedly, they're not in a great format for everyone to use. And so that's one of our next initiatives as the larger group of national researchers is to put these into some sort of a better repository that people can access them and make sense of them for the reasons they might want to use them.
Okay.
Also trying to move toward basically group extension resources. So as a plant pathologist, I'm working with the other plant pathologists, weed scientists, and entomologists to capture images of what are the most common or important diseases, insects, and weeds for, this crop. And once that happens, then we'll have a place you can go say, oh, there's something wrong with this hemp. What's it look like? What are the possible solutions to this? So that's our next step as well.
Okay. So we talked a little bit about the mission of extension, as a nerd translator, but talk a little bit more about sort of like what that mission is, as a land grant. Is that what you call it? Land grant university, and sort of what the big mission is, and then how that kind of manifests itself in the hemp space.
Yeah, so the larger mission of the land grant university, and every state has one. For us, it's Penn State. And those were established back in the 1800s to give each state a local place that can work towards the economic improvement and really serve the needs of the people who are in that state, largely economically. And so originally it was pretty much all agricultural, right? Because that was the main economic driver of the time. But now it's expanded into a lot of other areas. I happen to work in the agricultural space, and that's still where we do a lot of our work. But there's a lot of things that land grant universities can help with. And so the mission then is to drive research that has the end goal of improving the economics or well-being of the residents of that state. So that's kind of nebulous, and that can mean a lot of things. For hemp, I think it means being a part of this developing industry in ways where we make sure people have their questions answered. One of the things we do in extension is we get a lot of questions, right? And if we can't answer the questions through our research, if we look in other people's research and the questions aren't answered there either, well, then that makes us aware that that's some research that needs to be done. Mm-hmm. And so we'll write a grant proposal, we'll see if someone will fund it, and we'll try and do that work to answer the question. So a lot of it is really consumer driven or stakeholder driven. And a lot of it is driven by the industries we serve. And so sometimes there are entities that are made up of people in the industry, and they choose to fund grants. So a good example is Pennsylvania Vegetable Growers Association. So these are just the farmers that farm vegetables in Pennsylvania. They got themselves together, said, hey, we need more research on X, Y, and Z. Let's pool our funds, let's fundraise, and we'll fund some of this research. And so that's how it can happen. We don't have that yet in the hemp space. I think people need to be able to make a little bit of money first before they can invest in research. And we're on our way. but we're not there yet. And so most of that work is, yes, driven by the questions that people in the industry are asking, but also funded through various means. So
Okay.
some is federal, some is state, some can be private, and some is being cobbled together in various ways.
All right. Are the services that Extension provides to farmers, is that free? Like if I was a farmer and I needed some help, can I just roll in and ask questions, or is there like a fee structure associated with that, or it's?
Yeah, so extension is your taxpayer dollars at work. So a great deal of the services we provide are free. For instance, we've got a plant disease clinic. And so anyone in the state of Pennsylvania can take a plant sample and send it to the clinic for diagnosis. If it's sick, something's wrong with it. And unfortunately, we can't accept out of state ones
Okay.
because that's kind of the deal, right? But that's one example. There are different things for fee basis. So like the soils lab to get your soils tested, it's a nominal fee, like $9 or $10. And a lot of our programming is free. So we try and keep things just to the point where we can afford to run that program, but not necessarily make a lot of money from it.
Okay.
If a program is offering food, it usually drives the prices up. So that might be a reason you might see something for a fee. But generally, if you have a question, you can contact an extension educator, and each county has extension educators, and they will work to get you the answer. And they might be contacting someone like me as a specialist. They might be contacting people out of state to answer some of these questions, but that's kind of their job, and they love doing it.
Okay. We touched on this a little bit, but like there's been a shift, or at least maybe I'm saying this hopefully, but the shift from cannabinoidal hemp to industrial hemp, the fiber in the grain. Are you seeing that more here in Pennsylvania?
Yeah, I'm certainly seeing more of the interest that comes my way to be focused in the field agronomic production. So I things that you would farm with larger equipment, and might be lower value, but also a lower investment in order to make that crop. And there could be lots of reasons for this that are, beyond my understanding as a mere agronomist. But I am also seeing that. And so we're also kind of focusing our efforts in that direction. So some of the areas we're working on pursuing are in that way, and our collaborations are too. I think people across the region are picking up on this and seeking those collaborations that help us figure out what the next most efficient steps are.
Okay.
So looking across into Maryland and relationships with emerging business entrepreneurs here, much less in terms of the CBD type hemp, much more in terms of, hey, let's work on really understanding these varieties for processing for herd fiber industrial uses. And some of the things that we're working on that way include taking the material from our variety trials. So we're already doing that. That's already happening and being funded, but using that to learn more information. So getting more bang for our buck and working with one of the new processors that would like to be setting up natural textile solutions to take that material and run all the tests they would run on it to determine how they would process that. So we're kind of starting to get to the point where we're getting, I would say, more sophisticated in what we're doing. Not just does it grow or not, or, how many plants grew, how big did it grow, but like, what are the actual parameters of this plant that would make it easy to process or good to use for a certain end application.
Okay. What you were talking about there kind of reminded me of the Pennsylvania Hemp Engine. I saw you at the launch last week, but that's an example of how private and public partnerships are forming, and they're raising grant money. And I don't know, what are your thoughts on the PA Hemp Engine?
Yeah, I think it's great to really solidify some of these relationships. A lot of the relationships were informal, and we would just talk and say, hey, it would be great to do this research or that research and things like that. But this is really formalizing that, giving it a name and a space so that it can solidify and grow. And I think that's really important because in terms of business and academia, things really need to have names and labels in order for other people to, see the value in it sometimes. We do a lot of grassroots stuff, but a lot of times we don't get the resources we need unless we have something like a real name and a structure to it. And so I think that's a really good thing and gives us something it's basically a scaffolding to form all these relationships and ultimately projects around.
Okay. At that launch, there was a lot of talk about genetics and getting the genetics right. And I started to sort of wonder, are they leaning towards like a certified seed program? Like, do you think that's where the hemp industry is going?
It might be, and that might be for regulatory reasons more than anything else, not just because it's good agronomic practice. I don't get too deep into that since I'm not a breeder, but so far the genetics have really been driven by industry, and we've kind of accepted what the industry has given us. However, some public breeding programs are starting to develop. So Cornell has a breeding program, and they're being pretty intentional about that, which is wonderful. Across the country, in all the different commodities and plants we grow, there are actually very few public breeding programs left. So very few corn public breeding programs, and wheat and soybeans. They exist, but they're not like every university has one anymore like there used to be. And so we're coming into this at a point where even those really well-funded commodities don't have university breeders. So I think it's pretty impressive that Cornell was able to develop a breeding program. And I would love to see other public breeding programs as well. I think for the industry, there's pros and cons of having a certified seed program. It does kind of rule out some of the maybe side breeders that would kind of play around with it, because it would be harder to, make money doing that. But it also gives us some advantages. Like we have a pretty good knowledge of how clean that seed is going to be in terms of disease and weeds. It's going to give us probably some peace of mind in terms of how incompliant it will be in terms of THC levels. So there's pros and cons. And with hemp, there's even more interesting folds and layers because of that policy stuff that it has to be attached to. And so as our laws and programs mature, they might find that it's an advantage to require certified seed in terms of lower red tape for the farmer. So that's something that I leave to the farmers and the industry, and I try and not get in it too much, but I can certainly see both sides.
Right. Okay. So as I cover the hemp industry, I'm a proud Pennsylvanian, right? Like I am an advocate for not only hemp in the state, but for agriculture in the state. But meanwhile, I want, a thriving national hemp industry. But I think in order to get to that, we have to have, thriving local industries, right? It sort of seems like hemp likes local supply chains. Can you talk about like what sets Pennsylvania apart maybe from other states, or like what advantages we have, or, who are some of the key players that are making our state shine?
Yeah. So I consider myself lucky to be working in this industry in Pennsylvania for a bunch of reasons. One is Pennsylvania is really well situated geographically, right? Because we're near several different cities, but we still have all this agricultural space. And so that makes us really well situated for a local supply chain, let's put it that way. But also, we've gotten lucky in terms of our regulators, our policymakers, and folks like that in our leadership who have really been open, I will say, to what it looks like to invest in something like this, where other states may have, shied away from it for a while, waiting to see what happens in terms of the federal entanglements that they might be getting themselves into. So there's been a lot of bipartisan support for this crop in this industry. And maybe that's because Pennsylvania was so much in the hemp space and sort of a collective memory for us from centuries ago. But whatever the reason, there's been a lot of intentional investment, I think, from our lawmakers. And some of our leaders have been pretty scrappy and working really hard to get researchers the resources they need. So they've been saying, hey, I heard about this little bit of money. I think we, might be able to get that towards hemp. We are really interested in making sure that this industry does not flounder. And, what can we do? What do you need from us in order to make that happen? And so I've been grateful for that. Also, they've tried to minimize the regulatory burden, I think, for researchers and for farmers, because, they have to do some amount of regulation, but they've tried to take a lot of input from farmers and researchers in order to make sure it's not burdensome. So unlike some other states that have either really high fees or have a lot of hoops to jump through, Pennsylvania has really tried to keep it as minimal as they can with, making sure they still do their due diligence. So I think we've been pretty lucky there. An example is that Pennsylvania made hemp a crop that is eligible for specialty crop research funds. Most other states have not done that. And in fact, the federal government didn't do that until recently. So that's been something that has really helped us, because every little bit of funding is useful to get one more question answered. No matter, how little or short term it is, it really does help. And so they've done that. And they've also really tried to help connect the dots between different people at different points in the value chain. So there's probably no other crop I work with where I know, like, all of the people. I know the processors, I know the seed people, I know the end users, I know the people in engineering and ag law and economics. Like, I know all those people in the hemp space because the folks at the state level have gotten us all together multiple times.
Yeah.
And that's really exciting. It's really a place that foments a lot of discussion and innovation and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Another way that the hemp people in Pennsylvania get together is at the field days at the research farm. And you've got one of those coming up. What is it? Is it on the 15th of August?
Yep, that's right. So,
well, tell us about that.
Yeah, on the 15th of August, it kind of fits nicely between some other hemp events that are going on in the region. And that way we can attract all the people nationally and internationally who you might want to hear from. So we'll have seed folks from across the country and from Canada to come answer questions for you. We'll have some other players in the local market chain that way. We'll certainly tour our variety trials and have other researchers from Penn State. So I mentioned that our variety trials are used for multiple things. So it's not just how much yield can we get, But they're also being used by researchers who are looking at insect ecology and finding out who are going to be the bugs that are good and bad in your hemp. And if they're bad, what can we do about them? So different labs from across Penn State. We've got plant pathologists who are interested in looking at what are the threats from a disease standpoint. We'll have a bunch of people that are also local in the industry and some of our policy enforcers. So the folks from the Department of Agriculture are going to come and give some updates and let us know what differences there are as that program matures too. They've always been really helpful and gracious to come to these and kind of, sometimes people's questions are not as gentle for regulators and policy enforcers. And they've always been really gracious in coming and answering those questions, no matter how angry people get. Not that we've had any elbows thrown or anything like that, but it's difficult being in that position.
Yeah.
And so this is a really good opportunity to have some of those conversations about, hey, why is this regulation the way it is? And is there anything we can do about it? And if so, how do we go about doing that? They really do encourage that. And along those lines, I should mention that this is a farm bill year, right? So the new farm bill is being written right now, and legislators are interested in hearing your voice on that. And so if you have questions, I was able to chat with G.T. Thompson, who is the congressional leader of that committee, and he was open to hearing what we had to say. So I'm encouraged by that.
Okay. I feel a little cynical about the farm bill right now. Like, is it really a farm bill year, or is next year the farm bill year?
That's a fair point.
Are they really writing it right now, or are they fighting about stupid stuff? I don't know. But yeah, hopefully we'll get some changes in there. Is there anything in the farm bill that you would like to see? Well, anything that you would like to see in the farm bill?
Yeah, I mean, I think like a lot of people, I would like to see hemp being considered for more, federal funding, but also for the 1% compliance THC level to be a part of legislation. We've been through the highs and lows of seeing what's the worst that could happen in a crop and what's the best that could happen in a crop. And so we're starting to find, what's that reasonable level of expectation. And so I think given that, it's probably time to adjust that up a little bit. Just as someone who's trying to grow this stuff and trying to stay in compliance and, be responsible about that. I think that can go a long way.
Right. Do you have thoughts either way on what they call the exemption, like exempting fiber and grain growers from some of those, regulatory burdens?
Yeah. From a personal standpoint, that would be great for me. I think my focus is really on that field type fiber and grain production. And so that would be very nice. I would like that very much. But on the other hand, I don't want our brothers and sisters who are trying to grow the horticultural type of hemp to have any undue burdens because of that. And so I think about what they're going through as well.
Okay. It's a fine line you're walking there. I like it.
Yeah.
Back to the field day. So it's August 15th. And like you said, it sort of corresponds with some other local hemp field days, specifically King's Agri-Seeds. They're doing a 2-day thing, the 15th and 16th. So if you're in town for either of these, you can do both because they're relatively close to each other.
Yeah, we're about half an hour away from their site, and we're going to do the evening of the 15th so that you could, if you chose, you could go to their event on the day of the 15th and then come over to us, or you can come over and stay overnight if you would like to come to our event and then go to theirs the next day. So that kind of works out well.
But you're not running an Airbnb out of the research farm.
No, there was once talk of putting up a yurt for our summer interns, but risk management frowned on that.
All right. So is there a place to RSVP for the event? Is there a fee? What should people know about like the administration part of this event?
Yeah, there's no fee, but we do appreciate if you register ahead of time so we know what kind of crowds to prepare for. So I can share that website with you. And please also, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me. And my counterparts, Daniela Carrillo, who is our new agronomist who is running these trials up at State College, and Jeff Graybill, who is our local extension educator, will also be able to be here and answer those questions.
Okay. And I'll put the link that you send me on the show page for this episode so people can go to lancasterfarming.com, click on it, RSVP for the event.
Sounds great.
Yeah. Is there anything else you'd like to share with us today?
I'm just really excited about the level of collaboration that we're seeing now and being able to participate in. I think improvements to the genetics have come such a long way. We now have some weed control, and I know people got discouraged, I would say, in 2019, but I think we're in a much better place than we were in 2019. And even the years since. So is not a time for discouragement anymore.
Awesome. Dr. Alyssa Collins from Penn State. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks, Eric.
All right, that's it for the show today. Thank you for listening. My name is Eric Herlock. I'm the digital editor at Lancaster Farming newspaper, the greatest agricultural newspaper in the world. Check us out online at lancasterfarming.com. Get yourself a subscription to our print edition because it will change your life. And like I said, I'm headed out to Montana, and most likely I will be recording the show from there. And I have the absolute honor of bringing with me a hemp guitar made by Hemp Tone Music. You remember Jay, he was on our show years ago. He was making small guitars and ukuleles out of industrial hemp. Well, he's letting me bring one of those with me to Montana, and I love this because the hemp he used to make the guitar is from IND hemp. It was grown in Montana, so I feel like I am, closing the loop, bringing IND hemp's hemp back to the mothership in the form of a guitar. So thank you, Jay, for letting me take this guitar with me. So I'm sure you'll hear what that guitar sounds like on next week's show. But until then, I will see you in the newspaper.
Industrial hemp.
Season 3, Episode 26 of the Lancaster Farming Industrial Hemp Podcast is copyright 2023 by Lancaster Farming newspaper, part of the Steinman Communications family. Today's show was written and recorded, edited, and produced by Eric Herlock. The music you hear throughout the show is courtesy of Tim Birdshallow.